Yeah, go for it.
The link is also available in the meeting and notes. So anybody want to access the link, I'm going to post them here as well.
So shall we start?
Yep, go ahead. You know, quickly introduce, and then I can jump into the slide deck.
So hello everyone. This is a continuation of the topic that we started last meeting we had, and we will be talking about reimagining the application component model. And this session should be more focused on like the how user experience should look like. We want to gather your feedback just so we have a pointer as like basically how it should look like. For those who do not know what reimagination of application and component model is, long story short, and there is a document linked in the notes, is that the current model where you have applications which have components is rather restrictive, and we are already like reaching the limits of this model. There are several sort of issues with the current model. One is that users cannot reuse the same component in multiple applications, which means that you have like multiple sets of secrets, multiple builds for the same thing. And on the other side, with the current model, for example, you cannot really model that your application is part of some product line, and this product line is part of something else, something greater and something greater, which means that we can, for example, create some sort of like status visualization that would show you that your, I don't know, your rel product has some sort of problems. You would click somewhere, you will see that rel 9.9 part of the product has a problem. I basically create a visualization based on hierarchical understanding of your content that you built in Konflux. And there are also like other use cases, but this is the TLDR. And if you want, you can read use cases in the document. And our idea is to extend the model that we have right now. And the main idea is that you would have a component. Components could have, you would, within the components, you could have branches, which means that you would have a repository. You would say that this branch is version 1 of this product, this branch is version 2 of this product, this branch is version, I don't know, Devel, yada, yada, yada. And this is a big difference. Then you would have groups. Groups are a replacement for the application, but groups are much more loosely defined. Groups can own either component branches, or they can own other groups, which means we can create sort of hierarchy in the groupings. And this is the main sort of difference. So yeah, Adam.
Is there supposed to be some sort of slide transition? Because right now I still have the title page.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, this is just an introduction about what we talk about. You have a link to the document I talk about in the slide, just so like we are not starting with nothing. And right now we should talk about like how the user experience should look like, or at least like we are drafting the user experience and we want to know your opinions, like how users should work with the system. Okay, Pankaj, do you want to take it over?
Yep. Thank you, Adam. So everybody should be able to see the slide deck here. I added some background. I'm not going to go everything. I think just highlighting some use cases here that Adam talked about. And essentially, from the early days of App Studio Hackbase to Conflux that exists today, the goal was always to help application developer easily bring the code into the container environment to start building an application. But as more and more teams are onboarding to Conflux, the current model is providing challenges to scale and showing the stress factors. And I documented some of the known gaps inability to reuse the component branch between the multiple releases, lack of flexibility to group components in a desired way without needing to create duplicate applications, no ability to view the state of all components at a glance, limited visibility into actions and activities during the pipeline runs. So we'll continue to look at that. This is documented use cases from different teams, from the TAS team, from the RHEL team. There is also a persona for product maintainers. There is a use case from the ROI team. Jan Kaluza has provided his use case and sort of see what we can do, actions and activities that happen during the pipeline, including snapshot creation and release. And then the last use case here is for a product maintainer, and to release the whole product at once during the GA, and after that, release functionally separate components independently on a need basis. And then there's some other requirements also. I think one of the requirements is that how do we transition from where we are today to this new model, and at the same time, for the users, make it easier that they sort of understand a transition between the two models. These are, I think, the primary persona. There is an Alex app dev. We also have program managers, and these are just made up names. But I think this defines sort of the personas who would be using the products to see the different information. There is a product maintainer that we talked about, and then the release engineer, or someone who plans and execute release for the product team. So these are sort of different components. There is a component that exists today, or structure of the new model. A component branch, this is something that is new. There is component group. And for the purpose of this discussion, I think groups within groups was one of the ideas, but I'm sort of renaming this to an application, which is an existing concept in Konflux. And in the UI, I want to show that how we can visualize that as part of that flow. So this is, I think, from the Adams document. So in the component that exists today, let's say chassis is the component, and car is one of the branches, and tractor is one of the branches, and then other component engine has multiple branches. And so you can sort of do multiple combinations of these into groups. So you have electric car, which you need a component branch car, and then electric, two different branches from two different components. It can group them in multiple different ways. If you extend this a little bit, then you can combine these groups or branches and groups together to form group cars, electric vehicles, or tractors. So I think my question here is that, is this an equivalent of application, or is this an equivalent of application? And we can continue to ponder on that as we look at the low fidelity mocks and see how this fits into that the UI mocks. Go ahead. Yeah.
I want to ask, the grouping is just for visualization, or does it have any meaning in the context of doing the builds?
At least the prevailing sentiment is that it can have meaning during the builds. Like,
What do you mean it can have? It will, like right now, like with the current plan, it will? Or?
Like, yes, it can. You can create the groups just for the sake of visualization, where there is no release or release plans or integration test assigned to it, just for the sake of visualization. Or you can create groups which have integration tests or releases assigned to them, or release plans, sorry, assigned to them, which then they have actual influence on the build. So the short answer for your question is yes, they can have influence on the build.
Like, you mean that, like, so is there like something like promotion between groups? Like, is it the intention?
If I understand your question, then yes.
Means that if I'm looking at this graph, let's say that from left to right, I'm building the car, and if the build succeed, then it will be, if the test succeeds, then it will be included in the snapshot of the electric car. And then if the test for that snapshot for that group will succeed, then it will be included in the last group, cars.
Yes, we understand right.
This is something that we've used to have in the past, and we deprecated.
Yeah, like I don't
We've
know,
just
like
called it environment. Right.
Yeah, I
but
think so. The environment will based on the namespaces. The grouping, at least Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, is more of letting user combine the content so they can plan for how they want to deliver or ship the code to the end user. Let me take another step here. So I think this could make a little bit clearer. So you have component branch A, branch B, and branch C. And branch B is triggered by the PR. And so branch B is contributed or part of the group 1 and group 3. And so if you see group 1 and group 3 are impacted by that, and they will be rebuilding, but group 1 is contributed also, branch A is contributing to group 1. So I think that will also be factored in here. And then group primes and group odds in this example will have the rebuild, which is one of the groups is then contributing to the group numbers that you want to release as a snapshot. Does that make sense?
Why a rebuild is needed? Like, why do you need to build multiple times?
maybe not the rebuild is not the right name. Basically, you activate the group, and in the sense of the group, like they are sort of replacement for the application we have right now. So if there are any integration tests or release plans, they would get activated when the group is activated. If there is nothing there, like no actual pipelines, and it's really just for administrative purposes, activation means that nothing will happen. Like no pipelines will be started. It will just get activated, and then like the dependent groups will get activated after this group is done.
Like, you mean by saying activated, you mean that a new snapshot will get generated?
Theoretically, yes, but if we are smart about it, we should probably only create a snapshot when the snapshot is needed. EA, when like you actually have any sort of test or release associated with the group.
Okay.
And again, I just want to clarify that this is the current proposal, and if there is any way this can work better or a different way, this is, I think, what we want to hear about in the call. And we will continue to refine this, get user feedback. I think that is, I will, at the end of this presentation, I'll go over the next steps and how we can make sure that this works for all the teams that are onboarding to Konflux. So you can, this is just another step here. So you can see that group 2 contributing to group E1, and then ultimately the snapshots are impacting the final group here called group numbers. Go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you. Sorry, maybe not directly related question to current topic, but where builds are happening, are they happening only for component branch, or they could happen in component group as well?
Like at this particular moment, we will stick with what is already implemented in Konflux, so it should only happen in component branches. But theoretically, like I don't see a reason why builds cannot happen anywhere else, but I think that's like beyond the scope of this particular change.
Okay, thank you for the answer.
And
Ryan?
Ryan, I believe.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, why is it that we're waiting, if you have a series of component groups, why is it we're waiting for a certain component group to finish before the next series of component groups can start? I know that technically, you know, the component test could fail in the snapshot for one group, and then that could make the rest irrelevant in some cases. But I think in a lot of cases, what we might end up seeing is, you know, tests that are multi-stage like this just take ages to run, and users are complaining about, you know, why is it that in order to get to my last component group, I have to wait 6 hours or something for those tests to start?
So I think that's like a fair question, but the problem theoretically is that it's a directed acyclic graph. And what can happen is that theoretically one like rebuild can lead to multiple releases. And I don't know how we can, in some way that the normal user can understand, really give them enough power to somehow tell us that actually you can run these tests even if the even the parent group isn't finished with its stuff yet. Like I believe that would be pretty hard to sort of like have users to configure. But if you figure out a way how we can like do this in some way that users can actually understand and configure it, like theoretically the model allows it. It was just, this is, I think, is the least, like the most understandable model for now for the user, how to understand like what will happen.
So, but why does, I mean, it would be great if this could be a configurable option and we could, you know, users could select to do it either way. But why did you choose to do this, like, you know, one stage at a time testing by default rather than defaulting to like a pass-through style where you just traverse the whole graph and create all the snapshots for every layer in the graph?
Because in this particular model, we expected that the groups are like dependent on each other. So it doesn't make sense for you to start testing like the higher group when you are unsure if the dependencies, like if they actually are correct, and that the test will fail. And there is nothing like prevents you from having multiple groups, like not in series but in parallel. If you want to achieve this behavior that you have, like you testing multiple snapshots at once.
Okay, I got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Ryan, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So for the group, so in this chart, component group numbers, essentially what it is just the composition of branches, right? In a different way. What was your question? Like, why don't we trigger the branches or the pipeline runs at the group number level at the same time?
Yes. So I was trying to understand why. So let's say component branch B was built.
Yeah.
In this model, you would build component group 1 and group 3, and then once group 1 is finished, you can start building component group primes.
Yeah.
With group 3, once that's finished, you can build group odd, and once odd is finished, you can build numbers. I was curious why, when B is built, you don't just start testing group 1, 3 primes, odd, and numbers all at the same time. So yeah, but it seems like the expectation is that those are dependent, and if you wanted, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, for example, if you wanted to test numbers at the same time as 3, you just put it in the first series of groups there.
Yeah, I believe that's like that's the model from how like we can visualize it and how users can understand it. Ralph, do you want to talk about this or this next question?
I think I'm sympathetic to Ryan's question that like it's not clear to me from the use cases that we have at the beginning that there's anybody in there whose needs dictate that they need this staggering of group tests. That we could think of the groups only as like a logical overlay on the components themselves, such that anytime you have a new build of component branch B, you could start the tests associated with every group, you know, above it. That I'm not sure who wants to wait for that. We still need the hierarchy, or would want the hierarchy for some of those use cases to view the status of collections and subsections of your components.
Yeah, honestly, like this way, like we can do it even like that, and theoretically then we can simulate the relationships in the UI. Like the user would set up this hierarchy, and then we would on the Konflux backend just create a separate applications what you have right now, which would mean that maybe for the snapshot creation, you wouldn't have to solve this problem of like, how do I create snapshot from dependent groups? Because all the, in the Konflux backend, you would only work with components, like that would make it easier. Maybe that's a good question to ask the users, like, do you want to control the flow through this mechanism, or you just want to like have like organization in this mechanism? But I think there could be a problem that as a user, at least maybe I'm just too deep in this, I would expect that if the dependent group fails, you, for example, do not trigger release for the like, like child groups. Like it could lead like it could lead to, it could be like very weird user experience, but maybe we can like be smart about it and just run all the integration tests at once. And if they fail, we just like wait for all the releases until we are sure that all of the integration tests passed or something like that.
I think Greg had a hand up first.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm proposing something different or asking the question about some related but very different. So I look at these groups and I look at if I build component group B, component branch B, right? Component group A is going to start to build, right? Component group 1, sorry, font's small for me. But now I build component group A, right? What shouldn't they be synchronized, right? I submit builds for both component branch A and component branch B. I want them both to finish before I start the group, right? So how's that going to be synchronized? Otherwise, I'm throwing away resources, right? And if you look at this graph here, if I built all three of these things, there's going to be a massive amount of wasted tests because I need all three of them to be built at the same time. I need them all to be done. I need every group to be, I need all the individual component branches for each group to be finished before I want to go on. And I think that's the way products typically build. I mean, if you're waiting for, you have something that's built of 10 RPMs, you don't want to build 1 RPM, do the next stage, do a bunch of builds, knowing you have 9 other RPMs building coming behind it. You want to test them all when they're done. And to me, this breaks that whole model, and it looks like it's going to create a massive amount of unnecessary testing or unnecessary snapshots.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
So basically, honestly, the topic of how we can synchronize builds, I believe very early on we decided that it is its own beast and a problem, but we can theoretically tackle it together with this. Like, it's just its own separate problem. Like how to empower users to tell us that actually when you have a change in this branch and maybe a change in different repository with this branch, you should somehow know that actually these two changes should be tested and done together. I don't know if you do it like right now. Like I haven't seen it, but I just maybe haven't seen it. But it's own like separate problem, which probably is not as simple to solve. But like theoretically, we can solve it within the confines of this system. We just like need to extend the part about the builds. Sorry, I believe Adam,
Adam had a hand up.
Yeah.
So, at risk of completely derailing this conversation, I'm looking at this as a bigger picture here. And like at the end of the day, our objective here is trying to create like a model of the relationship of different pieces of software. That's what we're trying to do. Trying to encapsulate that model. We already have another upstream community that's actually doing this. It's called Backstage. And they have a system already there that's granted on paper, it's maybe a little tailored to microservices, perhaps. But I don't see why we can't participate there and influence it to take that model and make it work for what we're doing, which is producing enterprise software. To me, it feels like there's not a whole lot of delta there, and that what's on paper can kind of like achieve some of the goals that we have here long term, say long term, and also get us to a place where at the end of the day we're not just building something that is just for Konflux and just the Konflux community is taking on as like a support burden, that we're leveraging the power of the open source and the other communities that are also using Backstage, which is a lot. So then we just work with it and adapt it to our needs versus trying to create not just a new model that's, oh, by the way, existing in etcd and we have challenges with etcd versus, and then creating our own UIs where not only does Backstage have the model, the definition, but actually its own database for storing this information, own mechanisms for retrieving this information, federating it, and also has a community that has, you know, a stock UI that we can use. So maybe this is a topic that needs to go to a different conversation, but I just want to throw it out there. It's like, maybe this is the opportunity where we step back and reevaluate, keeping things off the cluster.
Yeah, so actually I read and thought a lot about your comment in the document, and we even talked about it within the team. There's few things to it. Like first, like that would require migrating to Backstage, what as a UI team we would actually like to do, but that's not something you can do in like a month. The second thing, and we agree with you that Backstage already has a capability to like show like relationship and stuff, and we can build basically on what is there. That's a slightly different topic in a sense that even in Backstage, you sort of have to create some sort of model that you are representing, and the Konflux needs to understand the model. So I believe there are like, these are like two different discussions, and one doesn't necessarily like they influence each other, but not in such a simple ways. Like you can represent this model even in Backstage. It's maybe now we more talk about like how this model works also within like the Konflux as a provider for the like CI/CD service. But then we can port it to Backstage, or we can think about how to make sure that this model can work in Backstage. And honestly, I believe that's some very interesting conversation if we decide to go like, okay, let's migrate to Backstage one day. But I think like we can continue with the discussion maybe like in some like other place, because it's like very involved discussion with a lot of things, and I don't want to like.
Oh, absolutely! Like it would be an enormous endeavor to go to Backstage, and it's just one of those like that. That's kind of like where my mind is. Like where do we as a community invest our time?
Yeah, so I will maybe make you like happy or happier. Like actually within the team, we talked about like for our like how this could be. And I think like maybe we can create some sort of idea for the future, how this model can be transferred to Backstage, and making sure that it is even transferable. But that's like discussion for the future and outside of this meeting. So Ralph, do you want to say something? Because it seems we wanted to comment on. Okay.
It was just on that, but I'll save my comment for sidebar so you guys can get on with the
presentation. Okay, Bruno?
Yeah, I raised my hand about the grouping of testing and the preventing of resource wastage. So this is something that Konflux already does. So for example, if you have a monorepo, you kind of get it for free. You get the group testing, and you can set your integration tests to only run for groups of your tests. So for example, if you have, let's say, 11 components in your monorepo, there is an extra snapshot created that's a combination of all of those builds, and where you can run, let's say, resource intensive testing or testing where you expect everything to be grouped together. Apart from that, it's also possible to pair your branches where you name them the same within your application, and they will be also grouped together and tested together. So we expanded a lot of design and work into allowing users to do just that, and also have been also currently working on a post-merge workflow, since PR groups are created for pull requests, but after merge, it's much harder to group things together, especially if you have merge commits or stuff like that. So we have been working on that, but as far as I can see, nothing in this newly proposed model is incompatible with that work. So I think we can definitely continue conversations on improving our current work and making it even better for this. But I don't think this model prevents us from going forward with that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to continue with the slides here. So jumping into how this can be visualized or laid out in the Konflux UI today. So we can start with add component. This could be the proposed navigation here. You can see you have an overview that's today, exists today. The new additions here is the components and the groups. You already have applications, secrets, releases, and then user access. And user can jump to the components and add a component. As per the definition, with this feature, with the new model, component is group name, component name and the Git that you supply. And then the processing that happens afterwards will continue. User can add component, and then that gets added to the list view. Once the components are added, user can go to the components details view, and then there is where you can introduce branches. You can jump on the branches tab where you can add a branch. And this is where you can associate your pipeline definition and build secrets. So I know we went a little bit back and forth in terms of the comments in the feature requirement doc. So I want to spend a little bit of time here to see if that's a correct approach for when we collect the pipeline definition. Is it at the component level or a branch level? I do want to mention that user can add multiple branches, so they can provide the definition of branch, and if there is a different tag or a branch URL from the repo, they can add it, and then you can see multiple branches for that component created in this process. I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
I wonder how this overlaps with the new service account model that build team's working on. Mikola, can you refresh us on how that's going to work? Are we going to have separate service accounts for each component, or was it different?
The plan to have a separate service account per component, and currently build service will be taking this responsibility and creating new service account when user onboards a component.
Okay. So is it, Mikola, is it an assumption that those service account will be extended to the branches?
Well, I haven't thought about this, but theoretically, we can adapt it to a branch and create dedicated service account per branch, or we can reuse the same service account for all branches.
I guess one of the problems motivating us on the service account issue is if you have an application in our current system with 600 components, and then you run a pipeline run, all 600 pull and push secrets get mounted to that, causing problems in the pod. So in this model, if you had a component with 600 branches, which seems really unlikely, you would get the same problem where you'd have one service account. The problem is smaller, but it's still there. So I guess we can go either way. Back to the UI here, when you're adding a branch, actually the one you were just on, if you associate the build time secret, yeah, do you do it here or do you do it at the component level? I guess is my question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is an assumption, so I'm happy to change this based on what we decide. This is the form for creating a component where we have essentially component name, there is a description, and then you add a URL to the repo. And then we can detect the component, add that component, and collect pipeline definition in secret here, or should we collect it here?
Like, generally, I think the question is like, is it safe to assume that you would use the same secret to access all of the component branches, which, theoretically, if we, the assumption it is that it is one repository, do we want to just have one secret for all of the branches? And also the next question is, do we want to use same pipeline for all of the branches? Because, like right now you have you can set up different pipeline and different secret for all the branches because you have a component, you don't have this grouping. So the question is like, is it something that users actually need and want? Or we can like group everything together when, like, at least to us, it makes sense to group everything together. But maybe like, that users actually have different pipelines for different versions of their, different versions of their components.
Adam, when I looked at so I went to task and looked at their some of the branches they have. So as a developer, if I write a code on one of the branch and I push a PR to merge that code into the main branch, and if I have multiple branches, would I need different pipeline to trigger the changes per branch? So if I have 3 production branches for 3 different versions, one is supporting the old releases or existing releases, and then few are supporting the future releases, would we need to trigger them separately based on where I'm pushing the changes? I think that is where I'm sort of trying to get feedback on, where do we need to run that same pipeline across all the branches or a separate pipeline for each branch?
I think it's reasonable to imagine a user might want different pipelines on different branches. Say they're building single arch for a long time, and then they decide they need to go multi-arch, but they don't want to mess with their old versions. So they would request only the multi-arch pipeline on the new branch. Maybe next year we come out with some new kind of fancy pipeline that builds not using Builder, but something different. People only want it for their new component branches, not for old component branches. But that said, the way we use the pipeline definition here, is it true? It's only for the onboarding action. When you want to have the initial pull request sent that onboards the repo. And then after that, we don't use that value anymore. If that's true, maybe it's not something necessarily, it's only here on adding the branches. If you want a pull request sent, then you can specify that, and it would be per branch.
So in that case, shall we just make it so that it's not a value that we store?
Yeah, we need to store it, at least, maybe not in the spec, but maybe in an annotation. The request, when we have the configure pack annotation, if we keep that as an annotation and don't move it down in the spec, it just needs to go, I think, there. Configure pack with this particular pipeline.
Okay.
So maybe can we have that build secret is defined on the component level and the pipeline is defined on the branch level? Like that makes more sense based on what you said.
Yeah, I can move that. Okay, so at this point, user adds branch, user can multiple branches within that same component. Don't have to go out of the context of that component. We could also come up with a design option where you could be at the component level and then select, add a branch, and then we can figure out which components that branch can go. So we can add some details there. So taking next step here, so create group. So group is a separate navigational item here in the left now. When you land here, if there are no group definitions, you can go ahead and add a group. And then group is simply allowing user to select branches to group them together in a certain way. You can create one or more groups. I think the question I have here is that if there are existing groups, or while defining a group along with branches, should we also allow user to add groups within groups here? And then the reason I want to say that is because I'm, at least in the mocks, I'm defining the next level as the application, where I'm asking user to select branches and groups. So could we keep this at the branch level, and then when they get to the application, they can combine branches or groups together. And I think from a UX standpoint or UI standpoint, I just want to make sure that the current framework that user has, where they could see this whole application view, starting with the overview, commits, pipeline runs, snapshots. In this view, user can add the groupings they want and then see the whole visualization versus having to show all of that in the groups. And this is one approach. We can show all of that in the group. So you click on a group and then you can still show everything there together. But user already knows how the application works. So I'm asking if we should do this here or we should let user define groups within an applications. Well, once that the groups are defined, they can put those groups within an application along with the branches and combine or do anything they want in order to ship the code that in a way they would like. Go ahead, Ross.
Actually, Ryan, do you mind going first?
Yeah. So I was going to say, earlier in this presentation, you discussed, or you had some pointers that basically pointed to the terminal nodes of the graph and said, can we call these applications? I think from a functional perspective, there's no difference between a component group that is a terminal node in the graph versus a component group that's in the middle of the graph, except for the fact that a terminal node, once it's done being tested, doesn't trigger tests for children. Seeing the UX stuff, I don't necessarily dislike the idea of having some concept of an application, but I don't think it should be a functional concept where like a certain component group is called an application. It might be worth having like a label where say like a conflux.ci/application equals whatever, and you can set your application so that you can look at all your component groups that you want to be put together in this sort of view. But I don't think that we should be assigning a certain component group as an application. I think we should separate, like the application is a conceptual thing to help you, the user. The component group is a functional thing. The component group actually does stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I didn't think about using a label. That's interesting. I was going to speak and say that I think we should just remove the application component, that it like will confuse things with the current model. And similarly, if you started out and had some component branches and a set of groups with no hierarchy, at that point they are your applications, right? Because there's nothing on top of them, and users should be able to be in that mode. Many users will be in that mode and will never move beyond it. But then as soon as you add a node kind of upstream from those, or it's a parent of some of those, they stop being applications. And I feel like that would be confusing in the UI. If we just remove the application term, then it's simpler. The label is interesting though, because I can imagine too, a user like might have, you might be Fedora, right? And you want to have a component that builds the base image and a group maybe for some related things around the base image. Then you want a higher level group that represents all of Fedora, where each of the smaller groups are like Fedora 39 and Fedora 40, Fedora 41. But those are like the applications. You know what I mean? The higher level one is not, is only special in that it's a logical grouping of the other ones.
So I think the follow-up question there is, where do we want to show? So today, I'm just simply referring this as application because we call the visualization or the what we show in the application view is the lifecycle, the commits, and the pipeline runs. So all of that will just simply shift to the groups if there is the highest level node, and we show that on the highest level node, or we show for every subsequent groups within that group. So I think that is where we'll need to spend some time to clarify which part of the node gets this visualization, or simply every part of the node gets this visualization when they get into the details view for that node. Because this is where they see the pipeline runs, the snapshots, and integration tests, and the releases, because the releases are maintained. And then that could also change how the releases are set up today, because we let users select the snapshot by giving them a list of applications. So they select an application, and then we show the snapshot that they can select that they want to release. So that would sort of have to change based on what we do here. So we might have to give them an option to select a group, a node, and then within that node, show a list of other nodes, and then let them pick a snapshot of that they want to release. So besides the terminology what we're using, I think it could be helpful to figure out where do we want to show this visualization and what happens in the integration test and releases.
Maybe because Nizi told us like time check, maybe we should stop the discussion here when we are on this border of application and component, and we can continue about this topic some other time. Is everybody okay with that?
That works for me. Yeah, can we continue on this next week? This is a great conversation. And thank you for.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, let me stop sharing and we can continue next week.
Looking at the agenda, Adam, do you want to speak on graduation model?
Yeah. So I'll try and verbalize it while I am going to try and pull up the issue in Jira that prompted this. One of the things that I observed last week is that we had a lot of folks trying to use the Coverity tool as in their pipeline, and that tool has a few challenges with it. It requires a license to be put in your namespace. You also need a dedicated pull secret to get it. It's not something that's publicly pullable from Quay or another container registry. And in addition to that, the combination of the onboarding challenges and also the fact that it's new and we're still kind of like figuring out the bugs, it became quickly apparent that we need to find a space where we can introduce new tools, new security tools to the build pipeline, while allowing those things to kind of be A, flipped off if they don't work, or B, have that kind of like a steady rollout where you have like your trial team that try it out, accepting the risk that it's going to be buggy, it's going to fail, having a fail-safe way to like turn the tool off so it doesn't unblock them. While at the same time letting particularly security folks who want to introduce these new tools to get that level of maturity, figure out what's wrong, identify the best way that the tool can be used, and sort of roll that out. So the net idea coming out of the conversation is to introduce some kind of graduation model for these SaaS tools, because there's going to be more. There's going to be an evolving market. We want to provide a place for that, so that effectively you can have like a tool that's called itself alpha, it's being tried out, it's a thing that's opt-in, it's a thing that everyone knows is experimental, and then kind of like other upstream projects where they have like an alpha beta GA kind of model, where you go from off by default to maybe being on opt-in by default to then it being like generally available in the case of something like Konflux adopted into, say, our kind of like default enterprise contract policy or a recommended default policy, that sort of thing. And so it's something that probably would affect like how we're defining the build pipeline and what's in that build definitions repo. Not only providing a pattern for us as a community as we're working with tools, but even for adopters that might have their own set of tools that they either have or want to adopt and use, giving them that sort of vetted pattern of how you can roll things out safely to your organization. So that's just the idea. I have a to-do to kind of write this up as in an ADR so that we can move the discussion forward, but it's worth kind of like mentioning here.
Can I share two thoughts about it, or like to split it into 2 bits?
Sure.
And one is that it has some strong relationship with the build definitions decentralization that Avi's working on.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to split up that repo into multiple repos where somebody who wants to create a new fantastic scanner task could do so without kind of any impact or even awareness of anybody else in the Konflux community. You're just putting it in a repo and making it available. There's then 2 points at which that starts to like get traction or something or have an impact. One is if it were to ever be introduced to the default build pipeline as a pull request on that repo, which is, I think we're going to call it build pipelines definitions or something like that. And the second is the conformal policy. As soon as it gets added as a potentially required task, that's going to trigger it. It's going to make it meaningful where everybody has to react to it and then maybe be upset that it's not, sufficiently high quality or whatever. We have in the EC policies this notion of collections. And there's one collection that we use for all our policies, which is @Red Hat. And this could be an opportunity to break that up into, first of all, something that's better named, but that also could represent like these tiers of graduation.
Yeah. And that also can help with, as part of that like model, it might have to incorporate in that, you have to have some kind of coordination here between conformal policy and what's on the pipeline definition. If we have like our default pipeline definition, like obviously like alpha new tool, here's a new alpha pipeline that you can experiment with, like that's like go nuts. That's what open source is for. But once we start talking about this is the thing that you get in this sort of like easy path, the default path, that's like when those conversations need to start happening.
Just briefly, we have some other motivations for breaking up that collection into smaller pieces as well. Like specifically we're making a Red Hat RPMs collection, which is kind of similar to the Red Hat collection and has a lot of overlap. So smaller pieces would be more convenient, more manageable for that as well. So that's one to Ralph's suggestion of breaking these up.
As we've matured too, Simon, like maybe it's time to think, or should consider at least whether defining the collections in the EC policies repo on each task is the right place to do it. Because like if we're in a multi, user world where there's other people using Konflux, and we're to make a change in that repo that adds something to a policy, it suddenly has effect for everybody. Maybe we should be making comprehensive lists of all the policies that we want to be enforced for our instances and for the Vue instance downstream in like ECP policy definitions for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't really belong in that repo with the Rego itself, right? So yeah, I agree.
If we want to have many, many, many names, we'll start those files to get big fast. Thank you, Adam, for raising it. We're essentially at time. We've got 5 minutes left till the top of the hour. In the agenda, Eric said wait for his conversation for next week, so we'll postpone that and talk about it next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. And thanks, Pankaj and Adam, for presenting on the UI changes. We'll talk next week on that too.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Just thinking about